The faint scent of bleach and leftover spices filled the air as Leo pushed a mop across the floor of Romano's restaurant. The last of the diners were gone, but his work was just beginning. His back was killing him, and he still had 3 hours left on his shift. This was his second job of the day, and tomorrow he'd be back at the construction site at 6 o'clock in the morning. But he couldn't complain. The pay here was steady, and he needed every penny. Leo had been working at Romano's for 8 months now. It was one of those fancy places where rich people came to eat expensive pasta and drink wine that cost more than he made in a week. The restaurant had dark wood tables, soft lighting, and paintings of the Italian countryside on the walls. But what caught Leo's attention every single night was the beautiful black piano sitting in the corner. Nobody ever played it. It just sat there looking perfect and untouched. The owner, Mr. Romano, had told him it was worth more than most people's cars. Sometimes, when he was mopping nearby, Leo would stare at those shiny black and white keys. His fingers would twitch inside his work gloves, like they were remembering something from long ago. You see, Leo used to play the piano. He was actually brilliant at it, too. When he was younger, his music teacher said he had a special gift. He could make the piano sing in ways that gave people goosebumps. Leo had big dreams back then. He wanted to go to Juilliard and become a professional pianist. He practiced for hours every day, learning pieces that made other students struggle. But life had other plans. When Leo was 20, his wife, Sarah, passed away suddenly, leaving him to raise their 2-year-old daughter, Lily, all by himself. Then, a few years later, Lily was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The doctors said she needed a series of surgeries that insurance wouldn't cover. Someone had to work to pay the bills and save for his daughter's future. So, Leo put his dreams on hold and got a job. Then another job, then another. That was 8 years ago. Now at 28, Leo's hands were calloused from hauling equipment and scrubbing floors instead of smooth from playing beautiful music. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he'd go back to music someday, but someday felt further away with each passing month. On this particular Tuesday evening, Romano's was busier than usual. As Leo was cleaning the restrooms, he heard a stir in the main dining room. He walked out and saw him. Everyone in the restaurant seemed to notice him at the same time. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Leo made in 6 months. His hair was perfectly styled, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Behind him walked 3 other people in expensive clothes, all talking quietly among themselves. Leo recognized him immediately, not personally, but from the business magazines. This was David Park, the guy who had started a massive tech company when he was just 25. Now he was worth billions. The kind of person who bought entire buildings just because he could. The hostess rushed over to seat them at the best table in the house. Leo watched from the back of the room as they settled in, knowing his job was to remain invisible. A few minutes later, as he was emptying a trash can near their table, he heard David Park talking about some business deal, using words he didn't understand. As he worked, Leo couldn't help but glance at the piano again. It was sitting there in its usual spot, silent and waiting. For just a second, he imagined himself sitting at that bench, his fingers dancing across the keys the way they used to. He could almost hear the music in his head, a lullaby he used to play for Lily. When he looked back, he noticed David Park following his gaze toward the piano. Something flickered in his expression, but Leo couldn't tell what he was thinking and quickly went back to his duties. The rest of the evening went on as Leo worked around the edges of the dining room. The group talked about business, laughed at inside jokes, and ate their expensive meals. But Leo kept catching David Park watching him. Not in an accusatory way, but like he was an interesting puzzle. Every time Leo walked by their table, his eyes would follow him. And every time Leo glanced at the piano, he noticed Park looking in that direction, too. He was wiping down the front entrance glass when one of David's friends made a comment about the piano. "Beautiful instrument," he said. "Shame nobody ever plays it." Most people can't handle a piano like that, David replied, his voice carrying across the now emptying restaurant. It takes real skill, real training. Leo's hands paused for just a moment. He'd played on pianos just like this one. In fact, he'd probably played pieces that would make these rich businessmen's heads spin. But that was a lifetime ago, when he was a different person with different possibilities. As he turned to head to the back, Leo had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He had no idea that David Park had been watching his reactions, reading his body language, and forming a plan that would test everything he thought he knew about himself. The evening was winding down, but the real story was just beginning. Leo was collecting the last of the trash bags when he heard David Park's voice get louder. He tried not to listen, but the restaurant was getting quieter, and sound carried easily across the dining room. "I'm telling you, Robert, most people just pretend to have talent," David was saying to one of his friends. "They watch a few YouTube videos and think they're experts." Robert, a shorter man with glasses, laughed. "Come on, David. You're being too harsh. There's hidden talent everywhere if you know where to look." Hidden talent. David's voice had that tone rich people get when they think they know everything. "Please. Real skill takes years of training, expensive lessons, the right connections. You can't just stumble into it." Leo felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard this kind of talk before. They had no idea what it was like to practice on a second-hand keyboard in a tiny apartment or learn complicated pieces by watching free videos online because you couldn't afford a teacher. The third man at the table, someone David had called Mitchell, jumped into the conversation. "What about that story we heard last week, the mechanic who could paint like Picasso?" "Lucky exception," David waved his hand dismissively. "I bet if you picked any random person in this restaurant right now, they couldn't do anything impressive. Take the janitor over there, for example." Leo's stomach dropped. He was standing close enough to hear every word, pretending to tie a trash bag. "He seems like a hard worker," Robert said carefully. "Hard worker, sure, but I guarantee he's never done anything that would make people stop and stare. No special skills, no hidden talents, just another person working a regular job." Leo's hands were shaking now, but not from nervousness. He was angry. Really angry. This man who had everything handed to him was sitting in his expensive suit, making judgments about people he didn't even know. Mitchell looked uncomfortable. "David, maybe we should change the subject." But David was just getting started. "You know what? Let's make this interesting." His voice got even louder. "I'll bet anyone at this table $50,000 that our janitor there has never touched that piano. Probably doesn't even know how to read music." $50,000. Leo's heart nearly stopped. That was more money than he made in 2 years. That was enough for Lily's next surgery, with money left over. "That's a lot of money for such a silly bet," Robert said quietly. "It's not silly if I'm right," David replied. "And I'm always right about these things." Leo couldn't take it anymore. Before he could stop himself, he dropped the trash bag and was walking toward their table. His feet moved on their own, carrying him across the restaurant floor. The anger in his chest was burning hot, but he kept his face calm. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." David looked up at him with that same sharp expression. "Oh, you were listening." "Long enough," Leo replied. "Long enough to hear you making bets about people you don't know anything about." The table went quiet. Robert shifted in his seat, looking embarrassed. Mitchell stared at his wine glass, but David just smiled like he was enjoying this. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I was just having a friendly discussion about talent and training." "You were making assumptions," Leo said. "About me specifically. Was I wrong?" David leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, when was the last time you played piano?" The question hit Leo like a punch to the stomach. When was the last time? It had been almost a year since he'd touched any keys. The old keyboard in his apartment had finally broken, and he couldn't afford to fix it. He'd been too busy working, too tired to even think about music most days. But David didn't know that. He didn't know about the years of lessons, the competition he'd won, the Juilliard acceptance letter he'd never been able to use. He saw a janitor in a stained uniform and assumed that was all he'd ever been. "I think," Leo said slowly, "that you don't know as much as you think you do." David's friends were looking back and forth between them. The few remaining staff members had stopped cleaning to watch. "Prove it," David said suddenly. "What?" "Prove it. You think I'm wrong about you? Show me." He gestured toward the piano. "Play something. Anything. If you can play even a simple song without making mistakes, I'll apologize and give you a tip that will cover your rent for a year." Leo's mouth went dry. "And if you can't, then you admit I was right, and we can all go back to our evening." The restaurant was dead silent now. Leo could feel every eye on him. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. This was crazy. He hadn't played in front of people in years. What if he messed up? What if his fingers didn't remember? What if David was right, and he really had lost whatever talent he used to have? But then he thought about his daughter, Lily, and her brave little smile. He thought about the bills piling up at home. He thought about the dream he'd put away in a box and tried to forget. Most of all, he thought about David Park's smug face and his assumption that people like him didn't matter. "Fine," he heard himself say. "You want proof? I'll give you proof." As Leo walked toward the piano, he had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything. He didn't know that one of the bussers was already pulling out his phone to record what was about to happen. He didn't know that his life was about to take a turn that would leave everyone in that room, including himself, completely speechless. All he knew was that he was tired of being underestimated. Leo's legs felt like jelly as he walked toward the piano. Every step seemed to take forever. The black piano got bigger and bigger as he got closer, looking like a huge, intimidating beast. The restaurant was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. The remaining staff had gone silent. Leo could feel every single person in the room watching him, waiting. He reached the piano bench and just stood there for a moment, staring down at the keys. They were perfect and shiny. This piano probably cost more than he'd make in 5 years. His hands, rough and calloused from work, were shaking. What if he'd forgotten everything? Behind him, he could hear David Park talking quietly to his friends. "This should be interesting," he said, not even trying to lower his voice. "Maybe he knows chopsticks." That made Leo's anger flare up again. He turned around and looked straight at him. "What exactly do you want me to play?" David shrugged like it didn't matter. "Whatever you want." "Something simple should be fine," his friends chuckled, and Leo felt his cheeks burn. He turned back to the piano and slowly sat down on the bench. The seat was cool leather. He adjusted it slightly and placed his feet on the pedals. His muscle memory was kicking in even after all this time. Leo lifted his hands and held them over the keys. For a terrifying moment, his mind went completely blank. He couldn't remember a single song. His breathing got shallow, and he started to panic. Then, like a whisper from the past, he heard his late wife Sarah's voice in his head. "When you're nervous, Leo, start with something that comes from your heart. Don't think. Just feel the music. Play for me." And suddenly he knew exactly what to play. His fingers found the keys and the first note rang out, clear and pure. It was Chopin's A Minute Waltz, but Leo wasn't playing it fast and showy. He played it slowly, gently, like a lullaby he used to play for Lily. Each note was perfect, but full of emotion. The sound filled the restaurant. Leo closed his eyes and let the music take over. His fingers remembered everything. Every scale, every chord, every delicate touch that made the difference between just hitting keys and making music. As he played, something magical happened. All the stress from his double shifts melted away. All the worry about bills and surgeries faded. For the first time in years, Leo felt like himself again. Not the tired janitor or the struggling single father, but the musician he'd always been inside. The melody flowed from his fingers like it had been waiting there all along. This was Leo telling his story through music. He could feel the energy in the room changing. The silence was no longer awkward, it was reverent. He opened his eyes and saw the hostess had tears running down her cheeks. Mr. Romano was standing by the kitchen door, nodding along with a soft smile. But Leo wasn't done yet. As the waltz came to an end, instead of stopping, he smoothly transitioned into something else. Something that would really show David Park what he was dealing with. His fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the hardest pieces in classical music. Leo had mastered it when he was 19, back when he thought he'd spend his life on concert stages. The music exploded from the piano like a storm. Leo's hands flew across the keys, his fingers dancing through passages that would make most pianists sweat. But he wasn't just showing off. Every note carried the weight of his dreams, his grief for his wife, and his fierce love for his daughter. The music held the hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The restaurant was completely mesmerized. The servers had emerged from the back and were standing along the walls, their mouths open in amazement. Leo could see David Park in his peripheral vision. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was sitting perfectly still, staring at him with an expression Leo couldn't quite read. As the concerto built to its climactic moment, Leo poured everything he had into the music. All his frustration, all his love, all his buried dreams came flowing out through his fingertips. The piano sang and roared and whispered. When he finally played the last note, the silence that followed was different. It was full of amazement, respect, and the kind of awe that happens when you witness something truly extraordinary. Leo sat at the piano bench, his hand still resting on the keys, and waited. His heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the pure joy of making music again. The applause, when it came, was thunderous. The applause seemed to go on forever. Leo sat at the piano bench, his hand still trembling, trying to process what had just happened. The staff were clapping so hard their hands must have hurt, calling out "Bravo!" But Leo couldn't take his eyes off David Park's table. The three men who had been so confident just minutes ago now sat in complete shock. Robert's mouth was hanging open. Mitchell was shaking his head slowly, in disbelief. And David was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before. It wasn't the smug look from earlier. It wasn't embarrassment. Instead, he looked almost impressed, maybe even ashamed. Leo stood up from the piano bench, his legs still shaky. He felt exposed, like everyone in the room could see right through his janitor's uniform to the person he used to be. "Leo," Mr. Romano's voice boomed. The owner was pushing past a server, his face red with excitement. "My boy, why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" Leo opened his mouth, but no words came out. Before he could figure out what to say, David Park was walking toward him. The restaurant gradually got quieter as people realized something important was about to happen. David stopped a few feet away from Leo. Up close, his sharp businessman expression had completely disappeared. He looked human. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "A big one." Leo crossed his arms. "Do you?" Yes, David ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up. "What I said earlier? I was completely wrong. I thought I knew everything about success, about talent. I thought it was all about money and connections." He gestured toward the piano. "But what you just did, that wasn't just talent. That was years of dedication, of real passion. And you've been carrying that around inside you while working 2 jobs and dealing with whatever life has thrown at you." Leo felt his throat tighten. "You don't know anything about my challenges." "You're right," David said simply. "I don't. But I'd like to." He paused. "When I was your age, I played piano, too. Not like you just did. I was never that good, but I loved it. I dreamed about maybe playing professionally someday." Leo wasn't expecting this. What happened? Life happened. Business school, my first startup, then success. I told myself I didn't have time for music anymore. He looked toward the piano with sadness. I haven't touched a piano in 15 years. So, why did you say those things about me? Leo asked. About people not having real talent. David was quiet for a long moment. Because it's easier to believe that talent is rare than to admit you gave up on something you loved. Because if people like you exist, people who kept their gifts alive despite everything, then maybe I made the wrong choice. The honesty in his voice surprised Leo. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire from earlier. Look, David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. I made a bet, and I lost. He pulled out a checkbook. I promised you a tip. But Leo shook his head. I don't want your money. David stopped and looked up at him. What? I didn't play to win your bet, Leo said, his voice cracking slightly. I played because I needed to remember who I am. Not just the janitor or the single dad taking care of his sick daughter, but the musician. The person who can make something beautiful, even when everything else is falling apart. A tear started to well in his eyes. I haven't played like that in so long. I thought maybe I'd lost it forever. David slowly put his checkbook away. When he looked at Leo again, there was a deep respect in his eyes. You didn't lose anything, he said softly. You just buried it. But it was always there, waiting. David stood there for a moment, looking like he was having some kind of internal battle. Then he spoke. Leo, can I ask you something personal? He nodded, wiping an eye with the back of his rough hand. Why are you working here? With talent like that, you should be on a stage. The question hit Leo hard. It was the same question he asked himself every night. Life isn't that simple, he said quietly. But it could be, David replied. Mr. Romano, he called out. Can we use your office for a moment? 5 minutes later, Leo found himself sitting across from David Park in Mr. Romano's small office. It felt surreal. Tell me about your daughter, David said. How did you know? When someone plays with that much love and pain, there's a story. You mentioned her earlier. Leo took a deep breath. Her name is Lily. She has a heart condition. The surgeries, they're expensive. Really expensive. That's why I work 2 jobs. That's why I gave up music school. Music school. I got accepted to Juilliard when I was 19, Leo's voice got quiet. Full scholarship. But then my wife passed away, and Lily got her diagnosis. It had to be me. David was quiet for a long time. How much? He asked suddenly. For her treatments. Leo's heart started racing. I don't know exactly. The next one is about $80,000. There will be more after that. David nodded like he'd just been told the price of a cup of coffee. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Jennifer, it's David. I need you to do something for me. He covered the phone and whispered to Leo, what's your daughter's name and which hospital? Leo told him, feeling like he was in a dream. David relayed the information. I want you to contact them and arrange to cover all of Lily's current and future medical expenses. All of them? Yes, I'll hold. What are you doing? Leo whispered, his voice trembling. I'm taking care of it, David said simply. And that's not all. My company has a foundation that supports arts education. I want to offer you a full scholarship to whatever music school you choose, plus living expenses, so you only have to focus on 2 things, your music and your daughter. Leo felt dizzy. Why? Why would you do this? David hung up the phone. Because an hour ago, I was an arrogant fool who thought success was just about money. You reminded me that there are things more important than profit margins. He looked directly at Leo. Tonight, you gave me something I haven't felt in 15 years. You reminded me why I fell in love with music. You showed me what real dedication means. Tears were streaming down Leo's face now. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, David said with a small smile. I can't give you back the years you lost. But I can make sure you don't lose any more. 6 months later, Leo walked through the doors of the Juilliard School as a fully funded student. The video of his performance at Romano's had gone viral, with millions sharing the story of the janitor who left a billionaire speechless. But Leo barely paid attention to the fame. He was too busy living his dream. His daughter, Lily, her heart condition managed and her future bright, sat in the front row of Leo's first official recital. David Park was there, too, along with Mr. Romano. But the person Leo was playing for was himself, the boy who had never stopped believing, and the man who had sacrificed it all for love. As his fingers found the keys that night, Leo knew that sometimes, the most impossible dreams are just waiting for the right person to dare you to prove them wrong.